Great. Hello, everyone. I think we're good to go. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Martin Coulter. I'm the news editor at Sifted. And thank you so much for joining us for today's Sifted Talks on hardwiring culture, creating clarity as you scale. With many thanks to our sponsors at Notion. I'm delighted to be joined today by Georgie Smallwood, Chief Product Technology and Data Officer at Moonpig, Karen Brandt, the Chief People Officer at Fin, Raphael Güller, co-founder at Sweep, and Chayot, Chief People Officer at Atomico. There should be a chat box available for you to drop any questions in that you might have throughout the talk, and I'll do my best to weave them in as we go along. So to kick off, I think I wanted to start by kind of exploring what corporate culture kind of actually means, how we define it, maybe how we can measure it. I suppose if I throw it open to the room, is there anyone who wants to go first as far as how you think about corporate culture, how you define it, and I suppose how you track it or keep an eye on it? I see a few people with their mics. No, okay, Georgie, there we go. Please.
I can pick up. I think for me, I mean, corporate is such a word, isn't it? Like, it's so loaded. But for me, like the culture of your organization is really just, it's a collective expression on how you work together, how you make decisions, how people treat each other when no one's watching, right? It's not a mission statement. You can't really write it on the wall. It's essentially what your employees will tell someone when they ask them, you know, what's it like working at Moonpig? And it's kind of, for me, the way I describe it is it's the invisible architecture of the organization. And it really is something that you have to nurture intentionally, and you need to know kind of what you're trying to create. What's hard about it in a high performance world is that it doesn't always have a metric. Like there are, and we'll go into metrics and things later, but it's also a feeling. And we don't love leaning into those as you know, as metrics, but the reality is it's what someone's going to say about your company and how you operate when you're not there.
Yeah, no, great answer. Caro, pardon
me. Yeah, I fully agree with what Georgie said. I think it stands for Atomico, so we're a VC, and we don't have any product other than our people. So it's a relationship, people business, and therefore culture is everything. I think the culture of Atomico, and I think it's you know, it's very you could replicate this in any other companies. Actually, it's like what drives everyone to be at the place they decide to work. And for us, our vision and mission is anchored in everything, from the way we hire, who we hire, who we promote, and who we let go sometimes. And so it's you know, having this kind of like North Star of what we want to achieve, therefore has a consequences or an impact of the rituals and the kind of like the behaviors that you see every day. And from that, we've got a set of principles that we actually wrote down. It's nowhere on the wall, like Georgie says. It's not something that you plaster everywhere and think that, you know, that's it, the job is done. It's more around like how, when you're tested, when you have to make tough decisions, when it's not it's not obvious what the choice is, this is when you go back to your principles and your values, and this is why they come alive. I could give you countless examples of that, but they're tested every day. And so that is, and I could tell you what our values are, but we've got 4 core principles, but we apply them on the way we organize ourselves, the way we communicate with each other, the way that we make decisions. All of that goes back to our principles, which are the values. Where we measure those, and I agree, it's very difficult because sometimes it's a feeling, it's a qualitative feedback that you get. But we have very regular engagement surveys, we call them pulse surveys, that we take very seriously. Transparency is essential, so therefore, like results are shared and we act on it. There's a lot of communication around it as well. And the way that we measure performance for each and every one of us is also is as important on the axis of the what they do and how they do it. And how they do it is like, how aligned are they to our values? And so each and every one of us have to grade ourselves on how we think we demonstrated the values, and there's feedback from 360 feedback from everyone, peer reports and manager feedback. So yeah, we try to codify and kind of measure what matters.
Oh, sounds very comprehensive. Karen, how is it at Finn? Is it similarly kind of codifying? Do you have a kind of key text or something that you come back to? How are the principles kind of operationalized?
Yeah, I mean, to everything that has been said by Georgie and Caroline, I agree. And we also have a set of values, and the way we see it at Finn is that we see it as a strategic asset, the culture and the values, and because it creates clarity, it allows us to work effectively together, to align across teams, and to all have the same understanding on how we want to do things and how we want to achieve our company goals. And because we see it as a strategic asset, is that we took a step back about 2 years ago and we said, okay, let's reassess our culture, and we got together with the leadership team and also the employees, and we said, okay, what is the target picture? What are the values? What are the behaviors we want to see and we need to see in order to achieve our company goals, in order for us to be successful as a company? And that's how we defined the values, the behaviors below that, and that's how we really try to do another check and make sure that we are all aligned and working towards the same goals with the same behavior, or with the behavior we want to see and the behavior we believe will get us there.
Can I dig into that just a little bit more? Am I right? I think you said there was an assessment, a kind of reassessment of the company culture. What prompted that? I suppose what wasn't quite lining up that made you think kind of go over was needed?
Yeah, so we had grown quite a lot the years before. We had also expanded into the US, and that's also another learning there. When you hire and build up new offices, you should over-index culture when you make hiring decisions. And so we felt like because we had grown so significantly, we wanted to kind of like make sure that we are still all aligned. And same with remote hires, having hybrid teams, so that it wasn't that we felt something was way off, and also the kind of like the new values, they were very similar and close to the old ones. There were a few things coming in and other things we took away, but they were like a development of the old values, not a new innovation of everything, right? But it was because of growth.
Sure, that makes sense. Raphael, can you maybe touch on this as far as I guess how you define culture at Sweep, and I'd be curious to know if you've ever had to, how much you've had to change it or kind of rewire it as you've grown.
Yeah. So I want to bring it back to what Georgie said, and I have a branding background, and so this analogy just came to me when Georgie was talking. I think in branding we always say that your brand is not just what you message; it's essentially how you're being perceived, sort of in the collective consciousness out there, right? So some of it you can control, you can shape it, you can drive it, but also other people are going to write about you, and there might be a bad press article, and that all builds brand. And I think culture is exactly the same, right? I think we can steer it, but it sort of happens organically. And that makes it really exciting, right? Because it's sort of this amorphous thing that you can help drive, and it can really impact your business. And so obviously it's important. And so we have all the same tools, the pulse surveys, right? The NPS score, the 360 feedback. We have our values. We do not write them on the wall. I hate this sort of imposed motto stuff. And so I generally think culture is a catalyst, right? So I think, and we always, every onboarding, like, so every 2 weeks we have onboarding, we're 3 founders, each of us has their sessions where they onboard the teams. And we always talk about this notion of aligning our vectors, right? Us having the same drivers and values, and it means all the vectors sort of stack in the same direction rather than going in all places. And that allows us to move fast. And I think we're lucky in a way because Sweep is sustainability data management, right? And so we're a B Corp. We track how much we help businesses decarbonize. And so obviously that means we also attract a certain type of person that really believes in that mission. And that's very much part of our culture. And so I think we're very sort of entrepreneurial and driven and also sort of quite pragmatic and I think really kind as well, which is something I'm proud of. And so we try to message around this and live it. And then also, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, sometimes it goes wrong and there's only so much you can control it as well.
Yeah, great. I suppose picking up on something I said earlier, the past 5 years, companies have had to kind of navigate different challenges around remote work, and for a brief period there was much more flexibility around kind of digital nomads being able to work wherever you want as long as you get the job done, versus a hybrid model, versus some who have insisted that everyone returns to the office 5 days a week. As I understand it, it can be difficult to maintain a kind of cohesive culture just when you've got different offices in different countries, but when you've got so many employees working from their kitchen table, I suppose, could any of you kind of speak to I suppose how you've approached remote working, how you've seen that kind of change over the past few years, and what impacts it's had on culture? I suppose I might come to Caro first, if you want to chip in on that.
Sure. So, I'm chief people officer of the firm, but I'm also talent partner. So I work with a lot of our portfolio companies on talent. So I guess I'm going to give you a mix of, both perspective. I think for Atomico, I think for a good year, we were almost exclusively working remote, and we realized, like every other VCs, that actually you could do investments and you could meet founders remotely. And so we did that for a good few months, and then asked our team to come back 3 days a week. And then recently, we've encouraged everyone to come back 4 days a week. This is, you need to go back to the culture, as well as like what is the model in which people learn. And so in a VC, it's a lot of mentorship. Mentorship happens. It's very, very, very difficult to do it on Zoom. And so after a few months of working remotely, when we did another pulse survey, you realize the more junior members of the team were feeling a little bit alone. It's difficult to get the feedback loop as often than when you are together in an office. And so for us, and you look at the industry, like VCs in particular, PEs as well, investment banking, most have come back 4 or 5 days a week. For our portfolio, it's been very different. We've had some companies that were forced to go remote, that as soon as they could get people back in the office 5 days a week, they did it. And with that came a wave of people leaving, and because it didn't suit how they wanted to work. But they were very, very clear at the beginning, even before we invested in them, that they wanted to have to be, in the office culture first. And that I'm not talking about just small Series A companies, but even like later stage companies with several offices, they impose people to come back, and that's their culture. Where I found some of our portfolio companies doing extremely well on the hybrid side of things is that whenever they started whenever we invested around 2020, when everything kicked off, their model was like only remote, and therefore it's been working. They worked out the way of communicating on meeting face to face. It is just codified with the way that they work, the way they make decisions. And so this works. Where I find it's been more difficult for our portfolio is whenever they went from, office to remote back, or staying remote. There's been the feedback that I get from founders, and it's still a question, by the way. We've got a founder retreat next week. One of the first questions is like, what do we do? Do we go back full days, full time in the office? So it's still a question 5 years later, by the way. But where some founders have struggled to get people back, and therefore they saw some of their talent leave, and they had to reorganize the way that the way the organization is structured. Sorry, I don't know if I'm giving you any tips, but that's the observation from where I stand.
Yeah. I feel really seen, Caroline, because we're Series B. I quit my job March 2020, just before shit hit the fan. And so we were completely remote for 2 years. I did not see my two co-founders for, I think, once in those 2 years. We met once. And so it was never sort of a strategy, but we were just forced to build a company like this. And we have gone back to hybrid last year. And we have 3 offices, and we're recruiting around these offices now because we can see as we scale the benefits of having people in the same room. But also we've hired people all around the world, and it's not going to go away. And yeah, I do think, that's become our culture, right? And I think with that again as well, I think it's easy to think culture is like a value statement, but it's neutral, right? There's all types of cultures, and our culture happens to be remote. That works well for us, but it's not right or wrong at all.
Sure.
Yeah,
No, go, Karen.
Yeah, we have the same at Finn. We have a hybrid culture, and we have a strong office attendance in Munich when people who are working with an office contract, but we also encourage remote hires in Germany, outside of Germany, and the ways we try to ensure that the culture, or it's also lived in like remote setups, is that we really when we hire people, we really make sure that the culture ad is there for even more so maybe for our remote hires. We try to communicate a lot. We use Slack, where we communicate extensively, be very transparent about everything. That they're also very well connected to what's going on, and things they cannot pick up at the coffee machine. So really try to make sure that everyone stays connected. It's always digital first. In every meeting, everyone opens their laptop, no matter whether they are, and starts the Zoom link, no matter whether they're in the office or not. And but what we also see is that you need a strong team leaders who are able to work with hybrid setups and hybrid teams, because they are the multipliers. They are the role models, and when it comes to show the behaviors we want to showcase in our culture, in our values. And I think one example is when you have a balanced team. We had in our recruiting team, we had for a few years, we had the majority remote, and only the manager was on site. Then it shifted that people became the new hires we made, replacements, they were all on site, and only one person was remote. And that was more difficult to manage than the other way around, because then this person who wasn't on site felt more in a way left out. And that's the challenge. And that's why you also need strong people leaders who can like deal with that and address it and make sure that the values are lived to and the behaviors are lived to.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think so I run product engineering and data at Moonpig, and one of the things, so we're a hybrid company, but I think it's interesting, the concept of being a hybrid culture or a remote culture or an in-person culture. Like, do those things really Like, is that what the culture is? I've always really questioned that. And I think one of the things I am big on, running functions that have completely different types of people in them, not just within the functions, because everyone is different, but like completely different job families, is that we have a flexible working culture. So I try to steer clear of the hybrid and face-to-face and in person. Different teams do different things. No one mandates full-time return to work, right? And actually no one really mandates anything. But for instance, product and design have worked out in their function what is the right thing for them. My leadership team are always in on a Thursday, and we make that clear to everyone. So if they want to talk to us, they know where we are at all times. And I think this goes back to something we talked about in the pre-call when we were chatting, which was culture is also about trust. And I think that the topic of where we work, how we work, is a topic of the times. But the most damaging thing is changing it all the time. And I think if you, whether you want to be face-to-face full-time, that's fine. Just state it and be clear, because people get to, like, the fundamental right that we have is that we get to choose where we work. And so the most damaging cultural thing is that people don't know what the deal is, or they think that it's a company where it's going to change from Friday to Monday, and it's going to be universal, and so I think it's really about being flexible to the needs of the organization, but also understanding your parameters of that, like your company's boundaries of what's acceptable in that flexibility, and then getting that written down, being clear so that people know what the deal is, and then they can make decisions around that. Because not everyone wants to work hybrid. Some people love working in the office 5 days a week, and they should get to know that about their company and the culture that their company has.
I think you raised a really interesting point there, Georgie, just as far as, I mean, with flexibility, and obviously you touch on trust being such a core kind of part of all this, but, I know of some organizations where, on, one team, as you kind of allude to, one team maybe run a certain way and another team maybe run a different way. But then how do you manage that? Is there something, is there a degree to which the culture becomes too flexible and you start to get inconsistencies, and you start to get people on one team saying, well, why do I have to be in, or why do I, why are we doing this? Not to come off, to frame it as a cynical question, but one team may have a certain set of responsibilities, and they don't understand why a colleague on a different team is not expected to do X, Y, Z. And does that, how do you manage possible conflict there?
Yeah, you raise a really good point, right? So I think that, so in my last 2 roles, I was the CPO and I ran product and design, and it was, similar job families and similar types of people. And I have made mistakes in the past where I have created a great culture in product and design, or something that I think is a great culture, which is, it is opinion. And it has been different to other parts of the organization. That is a mistake. And it causes, it feels great in the team, and it causes a huge amount of disruption in an organization. And now that I run a much larger percentage of the wider organization, I'm a big believer that less rules held at a more holistic level are a better way to craft a culture than kind of being that, like, team. We all have that kind of team that we just loved being in, right? And it was just perfect for us, and we loved our colleagues, and we're still friends with everyone, and that is great. But at a macro company level, especially when you're getting into the thousands, hundreds or thousands of staff, it does not scale, and it causes way more problems than anything else. So I think to answer your question, the way that I make sure that it stays flexible and not unfair, because I think those are the kind of the benefits, are that the idiosyncrasies of different functions have to be created as the function. They can't be just the boss deciding that, oh, in product and design we do this. They have to be created together, and that's a part of that culture. So by us saying we're pro flexible working, there's lots under that to unpack, right? So what is flexible at a team level, what is flexible at a company level, and what is flexible at an individual level? Now, UK law helps that as well from an individual perspective, but it's not as easy as saying we do flexible working and everyone just gets to decide what's going on, because it's ridiculous if you've got people coming into the office at different hours, different times. Are you keeping an office space for the full 750 head count, just in case someone decides that at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning they want to be in the office? Like, you need some structure around things. So lightweight but clear rules at the top, so that that part cascades through the organization.
Sure.
I agree on the, sorry, Richard, just elaborate. I mean, I agree on the lightweight, like high level guidelines you give. This is also what we say, like in Munich, ideally be in the office 3 hours, but we don't have any strict rules. However, in the way, if a team says, okay, I'm hiring everyone remote because that works best for me, and another team says I hire everyone on the ground, that for us at least it works fine. And I think the reason is because, I mean, we are very delivery impact focused, and we have our behaviors kind of like defined or like described, and what we want to see when people collaborate and make decisions, and what they, you know, should aim for. And if the delivery and the impact is there, in the end, I mean, I don't care, if I say it that way, whether they are on site or not, right? As long as the output is there and the results are there, and the company is also thriving. And so I think the work setup, we are very flexible on the behaviors and what they need to show and how to deliver the results. This is something which we wanted to define with our culture and the values we have defined and rolled out and activated. And this is where we are very strict in terms of, we evaluate in our performance reviews. Do we see any value breaches, right? Or anything where we ask for open and honest feedback? Do we see that in multi-source feedback, the feedback that is provided is not constructive enough, right? Then we try to give direct feedback and say, hey, you know, please tell me something I need to improve on. There must be something, right? So we really try to foster that culture by being very close and to the behaviors people show, and to also give direct feedback on those behaviors.
Great. I'm conscious that we've had a couple of questions come in. Thank you, everyone who's chipped in on the Q&A box. So I just want to weave in a couple of these here. We've got a couple from Andrew. I'll try and pull these together. There's one on how do you monitor and we use the word enforce behavioral changes, and how can you do that as a small company without the bureaucracy or burden of having constant written surveys and reviews? So I think enforcing behavioral change, and I suppose not having, how do you think about the bureaucracy or the burden of these surveys and reviews and such? If anyone wants to chip on that, Raphael, maybe?
Sure. I mean, I think one of my personal learnings is, I think maybe I spend too much time trying to change behavior, and, you know, sort of try to fix what isn't a match, rather than amplify the right behavior and pick up behavior. I think it's really hard. I mean, certainly people change, right? And you can sort of nudge and massage, but I think your time is probably much better spent rewarding and amplifying the right things, right? And make that grow, and that sort of pulls everything else with it, right? And the reality is, I think sometimes, yeah, somebody might be an amazing person, right? An amazing worker, but it creates too much friction, right? And I think it's amazing also on culture sort of not being static, right? You can add one person into a team and the culture completely shifts overnight. I think it's fascinating how on one hand it seems so stable and embedded, and it can also shift so quickly. And that's actually the other thing I wanted to add to the discussion about sort of nuances of cultures in different teams. I think there's sort of this vertical piece, and then there's also the horizontal piece of how culture does evolve over time. And I think that's sort of inevitable as well. We're celebrating 5 years of Sweep this year, and our culture has definitely changed, right? And I think there's probably certain things that you think are mission critical and integral and non-negotiable, and how do you anchor them and phrase them the right way, to Georgie's point, and then other stuff that I think you need to be okay with changing. And so yeah, so I don't, and I guess the other part of the question was, how do you manage surveys, etc. I mean, maybe this sounds like a boring answer when everything is about AI these days, but I do think there is so much ways that can help accelerate and make things more efficient. And so we do 360 feedback loops, right? We do it quite frequently. I know it takes so much time. Everybody panics over it and, you know, spends hours and weeks trying to come up with nice ways to formulate stuff. You know, pull up your ChatGPT, tell it to just listen and summarize in the end and just talk, right? Just everything that's in your mind, just ramble it into your phone and you get a beautifully structured thing out. Make it, you know, give you the response as per good feedback practices and copy that into the form, right? So I think there's ways to sort of remove the friction and the busy work of giving feedback and making it flow.
Sure. Caro, I want to come to you because obviously I know you work with a lot of many different portfolio companies of different sizes. On that question of the kind of bureaucracy or burden, I imagine there are some companies have different approaches. Some are always trying to make it as easy and smooth as possible. Have you seen much variety in the approach?
I think I'm going to focus on the most, like the smaller size. So I'm not sure how small that company is, but let's say, you know, less than 50 maybe. I actually think that introducing, and it's a people person telling you this, introducing too many processes at once just is one of the culture killers. There's ways of, and I'm going to go back to what Raphael was saying, but there's ways of enforcing by just showing, and that leadership is everything here. The leaders, I don't know who, the founders to start with, obviously, but also like they're people like, you know, responsible managers maybe. What a 50-ish size of organization have this the biggest role that they play. They set the tone. They set the tone of like how you show up, when you show up. They set the tone around how you give feedback. And you don't need to have, you know, pulse surveys or regular kind of like, you know, you can also do that verbally. What matters, I mean, at a bigger size of organization, it's becoming hard to just like capture the feedback and just act like you need some data, you need some written data, just because of the size. But when it's small, you can just, what matters for employees is, are they listened? Do they understand what's expected from them, from the what and the how? Are they listened to? And does management or founders act on their feedback? And whenever they see something wrong, and in general, and going back to Raphael's point, we see some of our companies struggle when they hire, I don't know, someone senior or even not senior into a team that is working very well, and that person is not aligned with the values. It changes everything. And I always tell them, you need to address this now. That's it. But don't put rules or enforce anything for the people who are already aligned. What you do is deal with the ones that are not, give them a chance, and then after that, you need to take the tough decisions. But great, you know, if I look at a portfolio, and even in my previous experiences, you know, when I was in tech, it's you, by reinforcing great behaviors, what you want to see, and living it at the leadership level. This is what will enable you to get, you know, to not have to put too much processes and tools in place to start with. I mean, that's
Yeah, it's a great answer. Karen, did you want to chip in on that? Karen, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't
All
hear
right.
that.
It's okay.
I agree. The enforcing part is usually not working, and not much to add. I would say Caroline said it. Like, the leaders are super crucial and super important. The role modeling aspect is super important, and it starts at the top. We try to regularly do loops also with the leadership team to collect feedback, to go through it, and then also to take action. One recent feedback was, for example, embrace openness. It's one of our values, where there was a conception with some of the employees that whoever shouts loudest or is closest to leadership gets the better project, or has an advantage in some way. And so what we are trying to do now is also to, I don't know, to address these potential biases that are there, and work with the leadership team, with the people leaders, to help us recognize biases in our decision making, in the way we communicate, in the way we treat our colleagues, right, and how we assign projects to our team members. So we really try to take that very seriously, and play it also back to the employees, and show them not only by a report, this is what we have done, ideally by the action and actual change that the leadership conveys and brings into the company.
I suppose yeah, I mean, it's kind of fascinating, really, because as far as the example being set from the top, and some of the stuff you were saying, Caro, about kind of setting an example, and it being about how the leadership kind of shows up and stuff like that, there's lots of very talented and bright founders and executives at fast-growing companies. But I mean, we often say in journalism, like, a good journalist does not necessarily make a good manager, right? You can be very talented at something, but does that translate into being a good manager of people? I mean, I think in any industry, not necessarily. I wonder to what extent is building culture. You can have all these data tools, you can have these surveys, you can measure things, and you can quantify it as much as you want. But on the kind of qualitative side, I suppose, as an individual leader, how much of it is about, to some extent, maybe becoming a better people person, understanding how to engage in tricky conversations and navigate relationships. Yeah, so could someone speak perhaps on Raphael? Would you like to chip in as far as I suppose, the slightly fluffier qualitative side of building culture?
Yeah, I just want to bring this back to something I said earlier, where I think maybe the more interesting piece to look at is, the delta between what you message and what sort of the lived experience, right? And I think you can say, hey, our culture is work-life balance, but the founder and the leadership all work until 11 and send emails, at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I mean, essentially, I think in effect, your culture is going to be fakeness, right? Or it's going to be not telling the truth. And again, that's a culture, right? And maybe that's the culture that everybody, I mean, I really not recommend that, but maybe your culture is, we are like working like crazy. We're all workaholics and we love it and we get high on it. And that's how we build a successful business. And some people might thrive in this, right? And so again, obviously, I'm not saying your culture should be shitty leadership, but I think it's just being conscious of, what is it that makes you and your group of people work, right? And there's not necessarily a right and wrong. But I mean, and I think with that, I definitely believe in just having to, like, you need to lead by example, right? And so, yeah, I mean, and I think it does help, I guess, if it comes from the top. And so until very recently, we were like in every single job interview, right? One of us founders was in every single job interview. We just stopped because it wasn't really sustainable anymore. But yeah, just trying to be there and living it and showing it. And yeah, I think that's very key.
Sure.
And I had something to, sorry, Martin.
No, please, yeah.
I was going to say, and then maybe answer the management point that you made earlier. But I think founders should be unapologetic about the culture that they're building and be very transparent as they hire people. So I'll give you an example. It's a company that we're looking at the moment. They're doing amazing, Series B, and they are workaholics. And they say, you know, there's no boundaries between work and life, because this is that you know, this is the moment for everyone to just be like completely dedicated to work. The way they recruit is therefore really aligned with that. I mean, and it's what they were saying as a result is, to me, what the founder was saying is that as a result, after the interviews, a lot of candidates select out. And that, to me, is success. Because what they're not, you know, selling something that they're not. They're very clear about what they are. You agree, you disagree. It fits you, it doesn't. But at least they're unapologetic, and they're and it's working so far for them. Question about how they will scale that in the future. You know, that's one of the elements that we're looking at the moment. As for the managers, this is where things start getting really difficult when you especially as you build companies, you have to put some kind of structure in place most of the time. I mean, we've seen companies. If you take one of our portfolio companies called Supercell, they don't really have, like, they work in squads. There's no people person. It's just completely different model, and it's worked extremely well for them. But that's rare, and so most of the organizations start adding layers, and most of managers have limited or no experience being managers, and this is where things starts getting a bit difficult. And this is the role of the people team to train, but then there's nothing that replaces reps of being managers and being managed themselves by someone who is a great leader and manager. And so it's also recognizing that some people, you can give them all training in the world, they're not good managers. They don't want to. It's not how they don't get energy from it. And I've had to, I've worked at Twitter for 5 years and in Google for 10 years. At the time where they were very small companies in Europe, and so very, very small. We're 50, and then we grew to thousands. But it's at some point you need to also make decisions on people and say, actually, you're going to be individual contributor. We're going to remove manager, because it's not just work. It's not working. So that's when it's not one model. You just have to adapt as well as you grow with the people.
I'm going to ask, just because we've had a few questions through on this, there's a company that Bernard has mentioned that I won't specify, but some have been accused of having a toxic culture, but nevertheless, driving huge amount of revenue, having massive valuations. The gist of several of these questions is how you balance, or how do you prioritize a high performance culture with an employee friendly culture. I feel like we've already touched on some of the answer here, but I suppose, is this a balance, or are these things that can go together as long as you're transparent and upfront about what the culture is going to be, or what you see as employee friendly, I suppose. Georgie, I think I saw a hand go up.
I mean, having worked for like the 10 years before I joined Moonpig in the VC scale up world, so my last two roles were at Tier Mobility and 26. I love that high performing cultures are associated with crap working conditions. How terrible is that? Like, that is not high performing cultures. That is high output cultures. And definitely high output. Like, there's a lot of stuff you can do when you don't stop working until midnight, and you pick up the phone at 2 a.m. Like, you can do a lot. You can also burn out. But I think it's hard because we frame the questions like this, and we do it constantly. Like, we talk about work-life balance being like soft and unimpactful, and high performance being that, your phone's in your hand all the time, and your kids don't know you because you don't go to their sports days. Like, those are not synonymous with each other, and it's not going from one end of the spectrum to the other, right? Like, so I think high performance is about impact, And I think that impact comes from having a group of people who are aligned, passionate, around the goals that the company is trying to achieve. And I totally agree with Caro. You can, as long as you're honest, right? The worst thing is that you sell a dream of, you know, finishing at 5:30. Oh, you know, every now and then we stay for drinks, so it goes a bit later. And then you get there and you realize that, like, unless you're at the free dinner at 9:30, like, you're not getting anything go your way. So that is the worst thing that you can do. But some could say that is a high performing culture. So I think that it's about, and I feel like I can't work out if I'm like retrospectively fitting this into my answer, but like authenticity as a concept has been around for like the last 8 to 10 years, right? And it was, you know, bringing that whole self to work. And, you know, I didn't really buy into it at the beginning. I was like, do you know what? Like, I don't need to be everything here. Like, I'm a mum, I am a wife, you know, I'm also a technology executive who's very ambitious. And so those two things don't have to always be the same. However, if you are a leader in an organization and you are unauthentically driving a culture, it will not last. You cannot do it. It gets seen through super quickly. And if it doesn't, you can't maintain it. Like, it's exhausting. And it will fail. So you have to work out, and that's why it's important. If you're a founder or in the founding executive team, you need to work out what is the culture that you can take with you as the company grows. And if you're in a senior position and you're joining a company, you are going to be responsible for augmenting that culture, living it, breathing it, because you are the person that people are going to look at. So you need to be sure that that is close enough aligned with your organic kind of belief structure that on a day-to-day basis you can, and authentic is such a weird word, but you can authentically do that. In part, one, because people will see through it if you don't, and two, even if they don't, you do a really good job of performing. You can only do it for so long.
Thank you.
I also think that sorry, Martin.
No, sorry, I was just going to thank Georgie for.
I also think that high performing doesn't necessarily automatically mean long hours and working weekends, being like you said, Georgie. I think you can be a high performing culture by saying, okay, I always aim high. I set ambitious goals for my team, for myself. But if I do that, I think, and that's a way how you can make it work, is you have to prioritize rigorously, right? And you have to set objectives and then try to make sure that everyone is working towards these objectives. And if something is changing, that you do it early on, that you are really try to be as much as possible proactive in seeing change coming up, and so you can avoid having like people run in the wrong direction. And I think with that you could also successfully limit the hours worked and to a reasonable amount, and by having everyone aligned towards the goals we are running to, and make sure they are all working towards that.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I think all this resonates so much, right? And I think there is, what can you do authentically, and then also what is your aims, right? And I think as a founder, are you trying to spin up a startup that you want to sell in 3 years and make good money and move on to the next startup? Or, are you building a big business, right, where you have other ambitions? And so in the case of Sweep, right, we're really impact driven. We trademarked this term, forever companies, right? We want to help. We work mostly with large companies. We help them decarbonize and track their ESG performance. And so this is about making them resilient, right? And making sustainability part of the business strategy, which will give them the license to thrive in a decarbonized world and last forever, right? And so we sort of have the same ambition for us. And it's such a cliche, and it's a marathon, not a sprint, but I really believe that's true, and it's particularly true for us, where I do think we're very high performant, right? I think we have an amazing team that delivers, but I think they also know sort of the time horizon and the context that this is in, and then what type of performance we expect over time. So yeah, I very much second all that.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say exactly that. It depends what you have to define what performance looks like, and how do you want. So output is very, in general, high performing culture is output, but what is the output, and how is it measured? It's measured individually, as a team, as a company. In general, you've got a mix of the three. The way people act to get there is super important. So there's like focus. So leadership is very important in focusing, so that you don't have to work on many things. You work on the things that really will bring the output. But also, what you also want in general, a very great high performing culture, is that you want people to think they're never done, because the mission is so big, mission vision is so big, that they constantly, they will never get there until you get there as a team. There's two other things I wanted to add, is like, as a founding team and people team, you've got the levers to be able to influence how you want people to perform. And one of them is like reinforcing the culture. If that's something that you want, you don't want to promote like strong individual performance, because that becomes, and I know Bernard talked about like a company in particular, like sharp elbows, people fighting against like each other. So you need to reinforce the fact that it's a team approach, or company approach. And then incentivization is the fastest way to change behavior. Unfortunately, this is, if you start looking at bonuses that are not individual, but just like team-based, if you think about not rewarding for short term, but longer term, you change behavior in the company. So you need to be very clear about what you're measuring. So what is performance, what you're measuring, how you're measuring it, and then how you reward it. And yeah, that works.
Sorry, thank you, Cara. Just on a practical level, I wanted to ask about the kind of tools, systems, the kind of role of internal documentation in terms of maintaining a cohesive culture, and how that kind of fits together. If Georgie, you might be able to chip in on this.
Yep. So again, I think that documentation doesn't create a culture, but I do think, again, I know I harp on about it, right? But going back to trust, like if it's written down, and that doesn't mean like your values, it can mean your values. One of the cornerstones of culture at Moonpig is something that is maybe a bit surprising. So the company strategy is crystal clear. It has been the same for 6 years since before IPO, and it will remain the same for the foreseeable future. Culturally, that clarity and the trust that that's what's written down, it's the same one, it's every strategy day, it's the same run through, it's the same 3 key levers, that kind of high level, we're talking about those bits at the top, the company trusts that strategy. And so clarity comes through in the culture, right? So if you ask someone, they'll be like, yeah, well, I know what we're doing. And so I think that documentation can be a really powerful tool. But just because you document, I mean, if you're thinking from my perspective, yeah, I would love my teams to do better documentation in Confluence. But that's not it in and of itself going to contribute to the culture. Perhaps how we made the decision in those things will contribute to culture, because it'll give that transparency, and again then leads to if anyone is thinking about like how to create a culture, I highly recommend that you look at the trust equation. So trust equaling, I think it's credibility, intimacy over reliability over intimacy. I'm going to get that wrong. Look it up. I probably got it wrong. But all of those things, that credibility, reliability, and the intimacy bit is the feeling bit. Do I feel, do these people get me? Or do I feel like this is the right place for me? But credibility and reliability, whether it's you're building a product and you want people to trust it, whether you're building a company and you want people to trust it, whether you're trying to meet your future life partner, right? They're all exactly the same things. And I think that's a really good framework. I saw one of the questions in there. That's a really good framework to think about the inputs to culture, because it is, in my mind, it's just trust.
Sure. I'm conscious we're rubbing up a little close to time. Raphael's got your hand up. If you wanted to share anything on kind of shared information repositories or the kind of documentation, what effect that's had at Sweep, and I want to make sure Karen and Cara have a chance to chip in before we sign off as well.
Of course, I raised my hand to try to improve the discussion culture and not talk about other people. A tool is a tool, right? A tool is not an outcome. And so I can use the hammer to hit the nail, or I can also hit my thumb. And I think one very practical realization from Sweep is, like, even in job interviews, I'd always pride how we, in Slack, we love Slack, remote, so Slack is our office, and everything is in open channels. And my point was, this democratizes everything, no silos, everybody's empowered to fix things and be an entrepreneur. And it was true. And then I also realized, more recently, as we've grown, I was still preaching the same thing. I think it had the opposite effect, because there was so much noise and so many impulses that everybody has received, where it completely stifled everybody and made them really unempowered, actually, right? Because I think they sort of lost track of what matters. And so in a way, the same tool that worked to achieve a certain aim or a certain cultural value, maybe 3 years ago, really didn't cut it anymore afterwards. And so, yeah, I think there's methods and tools, but just think about what you want to do first and then how you use the tool to achieve that, rather than this is the tool I need to create culture.
Sure. Karen, on the internal.
Yeah, so we also, I mentioned it before, we have Slack, we also have documentation on a Confluence, but living is most important, right? Living and experiencing the culture is most important. And so maybe an example how we try to also get hybrid or remote colleagues to get the feel and the experience of, and be able to build trust, is we have on-site weeks 3 times a year where people come to the office and they meet each other. We do like also sometimes some value themed sessions we have to bring it more to life, but also just work together on site in a team in one room, or have fun together, do something together at dinner or at the weekend, etc. I think this is also what brings it to life for those people who might not experience all the time, because they are at least in person, because they are not in the office. So this is also something that really helps us to connect, to build trust, and work, collaborate together effectively.
Great, thank you. And Caro, with
I'm just going to add something that maybe I haven't talked about. Again, I'm a people person. We've got handbooks and stuff like that. This is just a necessary evil. It's not something you should spend a lot of time on. What I think is the communication is important. There is also we've got Slack, there's Notions, all of this to share, everything around transparency, which is one of our values. What I found, and we did this in my previous companies as well, is how does this translate with your customers, your users? Remind people why they work and why they're so lucky to work at your company when you get users, customers to come. And for us, is our founders. They come and they just it just energizes everyone. You've got sometimes you've got a bit of a wobble. You put an amazing company founder, very kind of visionary, come in and do a talk to us and remind us why we work here every day. And there is this kind of energy and this feeling that's one of the most powerful tools. We did at Twitter, having users come in every Friday to talk to us. And that reminds you of the power of the platform. So think creatively about how to reinforce the alignment to vision, mission, and culture.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That feels like a great place to end, and bang on time as well. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us here today for a really enjoyable conversation. And thank you, everyone who tuned in. I hope you found it insightful and enjoyable. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and take care. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.